talking to some of our customers, they're using AI to do things like summarize meeting minutes, to create customer emails, and that's great. But in order to make that work, you sort of have to think through what the setup is.
This has been the Accounting Voices podcast, giving you all the information you need to stay ahead of things and be relevant in your role. Talking about AI in the accounting world, and it's changing the game. So is AI a good thing generally for accounting firms? The evil incarnate.
I certainly think it's going to change the profession massively. So creating sets of accounts, creating tax returns, and I think that's extremely automatable. It's fairly easy to automate the preparation processes, but the communications, the relationship.
What firms should be doing now to adopt AI practically? Because looking at small targeted wins, because we want to build confidence. It's a new technology, but once we get beyond that, how much more sophisticated can accounting professionals get with AI?
So they put a lot of effort into using AI in terms of coding transactions. They put a huge amount into automatically doing bank recs.
On a special bonus episode here of the Accounting Voices podcast, we have a special guest, Ian Gregory. Good day, sir.
Hello, how are you?
Talking about AI in the accounting world, and it's changing the game. On a special bonus episode here of the Accounting Voices podcast, we have a special guest, Ian Gregory. Good day, sir.
Hello, how are you?
Ian, you're in Advancetrack, and you're very much on the cutting edge of talking to firms and what is working today. What kind of shape do you feel the accounting game is in right now?
I think we're in a big state of flux around AI. There's a huge amount of hype out there. Yeah, and a lot of people just don't know what to do. And there are some of the more forward-thinking firms and the big four who are really putting a lot of effort into seeing what's possible for the average accountant. I think there's just a lot of confusion, and it's understandable. I mean, even as a techie, I struggle to really understand what's going on and what's happening. So for somebody who's not got my background, it's just going to be stunningly confusing.
Comforting that you don't know what's going on and you're on the bleeding edge of this. So is AI a good thing generally for accountants and accounting firms, or is it the evil incarnate?
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it could go either way. I certainly think it's going to change the profession massively. I think, if you look at the direction of travel, a lot of accounting work is still, very compliance related. So creating sets of accounts, creating tax returns. And I think that's extremely automatable. And I think there's a lot of firms out there that tend to really focus on that type of work. And I think those firms are going to have to look at their business model. I mean, people have been talking about advisory being key for literally decades. I think it's going to, that's the bit that's going to survive. It's fairly easy to automate the preparation processes, but the communications, the relationship, it's much harder. I think it depends where you sit on that spectrum as to how it's going to affect you.
Well, here on the Accounting Voices podcast, we aim to give accountants what they need to stay relevant and stay in the game and stay on the cutting edge of what's important for them and their clients. So I want to ask you what firms should be doing now to adopt AI practically, because some firms are dabbling, some firms are investing and doubling down. Some firms are wait and see. We know the adoption curve and they are lagging behind. So give us perhaps some examples of use cases or the kind of things that firms should be doing with AI.
I mean, I think if you've not looked at it yet, the thing to do is to start, to pick one of the large language models and start using it. So to get a paid subscription, you have to be very careful about how those subscriptions use your data, even the paid ones these days. Some of them still use it for training. And just start using it for things like doing searches. So avoid putting client data in, anything like that. Avoid doing really sophisticated things, but just get used to it. And you'll begin to learn some of the quirks of a model. So, for example, one of the things I learned early on is it's sometimes a bit like talking to somebody who's got Alzheimer's. You start off a conversation and then 10 minutes later, you're continuing the conversation and they've forgotten the first bit. And it's just things like that where you realize actually that, there's still a lot of problems in these models. So it's just beginning to understand that. And if talking to some of our customers, they're using AI to do things like to summarize meeting minutes, to create customer emails. And that's great. But in order to make that work, you sort of have to think through what the setup is. So if you just generically put something into a chatbot, please create me an email that's going to send this to a customer, it won't sound like you. There's quite a lot of setup. Get the AI to generate content that actually sounds like you and that's built around your firm. And even in that scenario, you could argue if you're going through that setup, it might be easier just to create, a snippet of text, because often the emails you're sending out are pretty much the same all the time. So, the debate on is AI key or is process key, it's blurred. So I think another thing is before you start diving into AI, look at the process and ask yourself, can I simplify these things? You need to look out to take out before you can start using the automation effectively.
Some of the barriers to entry for accountants who are generally tentative types, they're in the business of risk mitigation, Ian, as you well know, that they play it safe and they don't want to be embracing technology that they're uncomfortable with. Some of the barriers are perhaps the security of data or just getting started. Prompt engineering is a new phrase that's entered the vocabulary over the last few years. So just give us some examples of very basic tasks. You've given one or two already, but perhaps if you've got a list of things that they could start thinking about.
Yeah, I think in terms of security, the key thing is pick a model. They'll have their strengths and weaknesses, but if you're starting out, it doesn't really matter which one you pick.
Pick a lane and go with
pick a lane and go for it. And then when you've got your head around it in its strengths and weaknesses, maybe then look at changing to something that's a better fit.
Sure.
When you pick a subscription, check what their training rules are. So even some of the paid subscriptions now, they will still use the data that you're putting into the chatbot to train it.
Okay.
And obviously, if you're working with client data, you do not want to be putting client data in. So generally, if it's an enterprise subscription, they won't do it. Some of the consumer paid subscriptions, they do train it. So double check that and only pick something if you're going to start putting client data in that is absolutely ring fenced. There have been one or two bad cases where people have put things in and it's come out later on. So, be cognizant. That's really important. And as I say, just start experimenting. The sort of things, say routine email drafting is a good one. And that's built into tools like Microsoft Word through Copilot. Is an extension that you have to pay for, but you can get the basic versions free just to play around with. Creating minutes for meetings, basic research on customers. Some of the chatbots are actually really, really good, effective search engines. So something that might take me 20 minutes to Google, I can now get the search engine, the chatbot to come up with in a few seconds. But you always have to think critically. Is it something that's actually coming up with the right thing? So it's always important to stand back and go, does this make sense?
And the stuff you're talking about is not necessarily specific to accounting. You're talking about basic research, gathering market insight, supporting staff with procedures and policies and process and analyzing client data. That could be for any business. So once an accountant gets a little bit more adept, I get that you're looking at small targeted wins because we want to build confidence. We want to build competence. It's a new technology. But once we get beyond that and AI is streamlining those repetitive admin tasks, freeing up time for higher value, how much more sophisticated can accounting professionals get with AI?
Well, I think it's interesting. I was at XeroCon in Brisbane a few weeks ago, and Xero were launching a lot of their new AI tools. So they put a lot of effort into using AI in terms of coding transactions. They've put a huge amount into automatically doing bank recs. They've got a lot of effort going into analyzing the data that you've got for different clients to come out with insights. They've also put a lot of it into the user interface. Now, that's a very recent thing. It'd be interesting to see how it plays out. But there are other players in the space who are looking at doing things like extracting data from documents that are uploaded to email or to practice management systems. There's a lot of stuff going on. And at the moment, nobody really knows quite how well it works. So that's, I think, step one. And then as you go further than that, one of the things that Xero demoed was, bear in mind this was in Australia, was that you could ask questions and it would run the chatbot using ChatGPT within Xero. And they're using that to query the Australian Tax Office guidelines. So what I think we'll begin to see is much more specific tools that are trained just on reliable data and that are ring-fenced towards accounting. And similarly, I've seen tools looking at things like tax-related contract law. So I think, a year or two down the line, you're going to be able to go, here's my client situation, what can we do around tax? And I think that's very interesting, but if you're a tax specialist, I think it's going to open up some really interesting challenges.
Well, how many accountants have wasted time on the helplines to HMRC or the IRS or insert your own tax governing body there, just wading through treacle? So that's good news. Let's talk about talent. Ian, if you ask any managing partner or firm owner these days in whatever country what the biggest challenges are, they'll come up with technology and talent, and maybe throw private equity and M&A and the whole muddy waters that are there. So what's the impact of AI on accounting talent and the career path of these professionals?
At Advancetrack, we have a survey we do every year called the Talent Index, which has just been released for 2025. And that's beginning to show some interesting trends. I think most firms are expecting AI to take some of the talent load, but I don't think it's happening yet. I think maybe the place to be looking is at the big four, who are perhaps a little bit ahead in the AI journey. And if you read reports in the press, they're saying now that they're recruiting fewer junior staff because they expect AI to take some of the load. So you're talking about now what they call, rather than the traditional pyramid structure, you're talking about a diamond structure with a few partners at the top, a lot of middle managers, and a few juniors. And what that means is that increasingly the emphasis is going to be on supervising and reviewing accounts, and by definition, therefore, the AIs that are generating them, rather than doing the actual grunt work of the actual accounts themselves. And I think that's going to be an interesting change. And if you think about what that means for the sort of people you want to recruit, increasingly, there's still going to be specialist skills, but it's going to be people who are really good at, let's say, reviewing and supervising rather than the actual work. And I think it has to say that interpersonal skills and critical thinking skills are going to become really, really important compared to the current market.
We're certainly seeing the reshaping of the entry-level roles, aren't we? People are taking accounting qualifications and coming out the other end, and that foothold on the career path of accounting, it does involve some admin and grunt work and those lower level tasks. But if AI is taking that up, where is the entry point for these professionals coming in?
I think it's a good question, and I really don't know. I mean, my background was management consultancy. I could see there's a path, for example, from people to come out of consultancy firms into accounting firms.
Yeah.
So there's a question: is it a graduate? Direct graduate entry. Equally, I think one of the things, I also worked in finance in a big corporate, and all of my colleagues have come out of the big four. So if the accounting firms have got a talent shortage, so are all the industry financial positions. So actually, there's an interesting thing there about where are they going to get their talent? So I think that opens up some interesting opportunities for the industry in terms of new services around outsourcing of financial processes. So I think, maybe those people are coming up through industry, for apprenticeships in industry type firms, and then moving across into the accounting space. So I don't think anybody knows at this point.
The opportunities are going to be for accounting firms. People talk about growth. Private equity gets involved. That their drivers for purchasing is growth. So what are the key areas for you where accounting firms can improve?
I think if you look at the market, if AI takes out that middle compliance bit, which I think is going to happen, I just don't know.
Commoditized, isn't it now?
It's commoditized. Then you've got a couple of key areas. You've got bookkeeping, because if end customers have got struggling to get financial talent, there's going to be more and more demand for the sort of bookkeeping type work. And that can be quite sophisticated in larger companies. You've got the advisory space, which we've been talking about for years. Audit, I think, is still going to be really key. And then there's this general just assurance of how do you know the accounts are right? Because I think most of the discussion around AI I've heard is about efficiency. And often, I think firms see the trust bit as a given. But as a non-accountant, I see the trust bit as absolutely key to what an accountant is. And we need to remember that all of this is about how do you know the accounts are right? How do you know that the firm is reporting, let's say, to the stock exchange and not trying to defraud its investors? So remembering the purpose of accounting, I think, is really key to what have we got going forward. So I think there's an assurance role, an advisory role, and a role in making sure their books are accurate.
And we talk a lot on this show about staying relevant and employable and promotable. Technical talent's not enough these days. Technical qualifications, technical skills. In fact, I've seen stats that say your technical skills will go out of date in 2 years. Your knowledge will go out of date in 2 years, and insert your own time frame there. So being technically competent is no longer enough to differentiate you. There are millions of technically great accounting professionals out there. So in terms of the skills that accountants and firms are going to need to stay in the game and serve clients, what kind of things are we looking at, Ian?
Really first-rate communication skills, particularly verbal, and I think critical thinking skills. So really standing back and asking, is this sensible? And I think underpinning all of that is just a great understanding of your end customers.
And if AI is doing it all for us, we don't think these days, even universities, they're putting stuff into ChatGPT and similar, and it's doing all the thinking for them. So surely that's going to affect critical thinking.
But I think it depends. I mean, I actually used to teach MBA students at one point. Okay. So what you find is a lot of people, they just regurgitate what's out there. And before AI, it was, what they Googled. And the really star students were the ones who went and, looked at the presuppositions behind what they were coming up with and started questioning them. So, if we take AI, everybody's going, well, AI is all about efficiency. The critical thinking is to say, hang on a second. From an accounting perspective, that's actually secondary to trust, and then beginning to focus on the trust angle. So it's just questioning the assumptions, what the marketing people are spinning at us. If you're in a client, questioning what they're doing. And one of the things I quite like is the whole Toyota production system and lean. And one of the things they have is go see. So if you've got a problem and you want to understand something, you don't listen to the managers. You go down to a shop floor and stand there for an hour and watch what's happening. And we need an accounting equivalent of, if you want to understand your customers, go out and spend a day with them. Wander, if you run a coffee shop, go and serve coffee for a day.
That's old school. It's like management by walking about. Do you remember that phrase?
Exactly. Yeah, I remember that. It's exactly that. Yeah, and just get in there and actually do the job. And you'll understand so much more about the business, so much more about their challenges. And then when it comes to doing the books, doing the advisory, and to some extent, it's just getting out of the, what we're all told every day. But it takes guts to do that, to just stand back and critically think and go, okay, maybe everything's not right.
Well, as the guardians of data, accountants have got to be very careful, and they do need to think and analyze critically. And generally, they're very good at that. I want to move in wrapping this up, Ian, to talk about accountants and firms don't necessarily buy technology well. They're not particularly strategic, and it's difficult not to be allured by all the great marketing messages that vendors put out on this integrates AI when it's just a bit of data scraping or chatbot or things like that. So give us some advice for decision makers, firm owners, and all of us really, things to consider before buying and implementing AI tools.
I think I'll come back to something I learned very early on. And again, this is out of Toyota. I'm a bit of a factory geek for those people who know me. And that is, if you're trying to automate a process, there's 3 basic steps. The first thing is you have to get it under control. So that means it's got to be consistent, because the second step is to simplify. I'll come back to that in a second. So once you've got it under control, then you take out unnecessary steps, and then you look at automating. Because if you don't simplify, you're automating stuff that's waste. The simplification, if you oversimplify and it isn't under control, usually the waste in the simplification is there to cope with the fact it's not under control. So if you look at the process first, understand the process, and then begin to look at buying technology that's going to automate a process which is both in control and simplified. And it may well be that you actually look at it and go, well, maybe a better option is people. I mean, I work for an outsourcer. People are sometimes a better option. And if you look at Toyota, what you find is they have people running the technology. They don't just run the technology themselves. And they're by far the most efficient car manufacturer on the planet, compared to some that are much more automated. And they will say that actually the reason is that people improve processes, whereas computers can't.
Automation backfires fast, doesn't it? If you get the wrong processes and workflows in place and magnify those, you're in a whole lot of trouble. So they've got to get it right out of the gate.
Yeah, and I sometimes say to accountants, what would it be like if you had to go to all of your customers and go, sorry guys, there's accounts we submitted, but they're wrong because the AI's messed up. So it's really important that you've got good people supervising any automation that you're using, whether it's AI or regular automation. You need to be able to validate those models.
And there's a whole lot of training, mentoring, coaching involved in this, because we can't assume that accountants are technology driven or not writing code necessarily, but there's a whole new skill set they need to embrace here, and that needs developing.
Yeah, and I think that's right. Having had to learn that myself, it's a tough old skill set. And it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. And it may be that you actually have to look at recruiting different types of people. So maybe you end up recruiting more people-focused people for the client relationships and some uber techies to cope with supervising AI. Nobody really knows at this point. It'll shake itself out over the next year or two. But I think there are going to be changes. And, if you are looking at those sort of changes, people like ourselves as outsourcers can bridge that gap.
Well, AI is going to take up some of the slack, but Advancetrack outsourcing, you also take up a lot of the slack with capacity and helping firms grow. Just tell us quickly what you guys are on with, Ian, at the moment.
So we are growing very quickly. We're expanding into the Australian and US markets. So one of my challenges is coping with all that extra growth. We have a very large team in India with a huge skill set, lots of very smart people with lots of experience in different packages. And part of a reason I can talk about all of this is we've got exactly the same challenges because we're, basically a large accounting firm. I'm having to think, okay, what sort of workforce do we need in 5 years' time? How is AI going to impact us? But what we have realized is that there's going to be a bridging period. So you can think about strategically where you want to go. But the question is, how do you get there? And I think there's an opportunity for people like Advancetrack to support you in getting to where you want to go in terms of changing the mix of your workforce.
Well, exciting times. Ian Gregory from Advancetrack, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights on AI and how it's affecting the world of accounting. This has been the Accounting Voices podcast, giving you all the information you need to stay ahead of things and be relevant in your role. Ian, just one last parting comment. How optimistic are you for the future of accounting?
I think accounting has a great future. I think it's just a slightly different future than where we are now.
Superbly well put. Thank you so much.
Thank you.